The Cathara collective was dying. 7 different alien races had lived together in peace for thousands of years. They explored space together, traded goods, and built beautiful worlds. But now, something terrible was destroying everything they had created. The Void Swarm had arrived like death itself. These creatures were not like anything the peaceful aliens had ever seen. They moved through space in huge living ships that looked more like monsters than machines. Wherever they went, they left nothing but empty. Lifeless worlds behind. On Veltar Prime, the crystal cities that once sang beautiful melodies now stood broken and silent. The tall spires that had reached toward the stars for centuries lay cracked. On the ground, the music that had filled the air day and night was gone forever. Only 3 months ago, millions of crystal-winged beings had called this place home. Now it was a graveyard. The Narati healing worlds were even worse. These gentle people had spent their entire existence growing magical gardens that could cure any disease or injury. Their planets were covered in flowers that glowed with healing light, but the swarm had twisted everything. The beautiful gardens now grew dark, poisonous plants. The healing centers had become places of sickness and death. Hi, Counselor Thalara stood in the emergency war room on the last safe world. Her skin glowed with soft blue light, showing how upset she was. Around her, the tactical screen showed red dots spreading across their territory like a disease. Each red dot meant another world lost, another million lives ended. Look at this, she said to the other leaders gathered around her. Her voice was quiet but full of pain. 17 worlds in just 6 months. Our people are running out of places to hide. The other council members looked at the screens with fear in their eyes. These were not warriors. They were explorers, scientists, artists, and healers. They had never learned how to fight because they had never needed to. Captain Valtos, the commander of their last big warship, made a sound like sad bells ringing. Our ships were never meant for war, he said. We built them to carry families to new worlds, to study stars, to mine asteroids. When we fight the swarm, it is like using a flower to stop a storm. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what they were thinking, but no one wanted to say it out loud. There was only one option left, and it scared them more than the swarm itself. We could contact them, whispered Counselor Pillinth, her tentacles curling with worry. The humans. The word hung in the air like a curse. Humanity. The Deathworlders from the edge of the galaxy. Every peaceful race knew the stories about them. They came from a world so dangerous that just living there made them into something fierce and deadly. They fought wars for sport. They turned entire planets into weapons. They never backed down from any fight, no matter how hopeless. They are monsters, said another counselor. Just like the swarm. But Thalara shook her head. No, she said slowly. The swarm destroys everything it touches, but humans ... they protect what belongs to them. Maybe if we ask them right, they will protect us too. The decision would change everything. The peaceful Kithara collective was about to invite wolves into their home, hoping these wolves would fight the demons at their door. Ambassador Kyleth felt his ship shake as they got close to Earth's space stations. He had never seen anything like what surrounded the human homeworld. Massive metal structures floated in orbit, covered from top to bottom with weapons. Big guns, small guns, missile launchers, and things he couldn't even identify. Looked rough and ugly, like it had been built by someone who cared more about killing enemies than looking pretty. His own people built their ships like works of art, smooth curves, beautiful colors, elegant designs that looked good floating through space. But these human stations looked like they had been made for one purpose only: war. Every surface had some kind of weapon pointing outward, ready to destroy anything that came too close without permission. As his small diplomatic ship moved closer, Kyleth could see human patrol ships moving around like guard dogs. They were smaller than his transport, but somehow looked much more dangerous. Their hulls were covered in scars and dents, showing they had been in many battles. Some had paintings on their sides, pictures of monsters and skulls that made Kyleth's skin crawl. When his ship finally docked, Kyleth stepped out into the human station. The air felt different here. It was thicker, heavier, with a metallic taste that reminded him of blood. The walls were made of plain gray metal with pipes and wires running everywhere. No decorations, no art, no beauty, just cold, hard function. Admiral Park was waiting for him in the docking bay. The human looked so small and weak compared to Kyleth's thick armored shell. Humans seemed like they would break if you touched them too hard. Their skin was soft and thin, with no natural protection. But when Kyleth looked into Park's eyes, he saw something that made him step back. Those eyes belonged to a hunter. They were cold, calculating, always watching for threats. Park looked at Kyleth the same way a wolf might look at deer, not with hatred, but with the calm confidence of something that knew it was dangerous. "Your message said you were all dying," Park said, without even greeting him properly. No polite words, no ceremony, no respect for diplomatic tradition. "Show me what's killing you." Kyleth's translator device worked hard to keep up as he sat. Up the holographic display, the images that appeared showed the horror that was destroying his people. Swarm bioships that looked like giant insects crossed with machines. Living weapons that ate metal and turned it into more monsters. Worlds covered in dark, crawling things that had once been beautiful cities. Park watched the recordings without showing any emotion on his face. He didn't gasp in horror like most people did when they saw the swarm for the first time. He didn't look scared or disgusted. He just watched, taking in every detail like he was studying a textbook. When the terrible images finished playing, Park was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile a shark might make if sharks could smile. "Yeah, we fought things like this before," he said calmly. "Back on Earth, we call creatures like this apex predators. They think they're the biggest, meanest things in the universe." His smile got wider and somehow more frightening. "Lucky for you, we grew up fighting apex predators. We know exactly how to kill them." For the first time since the swarm had appeared, Kyleth felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope Captain Kim stared at the planet Thero 7 through the main screen of her ship. Once, this world had been a beautiful mining colony where thousands of aliens lived and worked. The surface had been covered with gleaming metal cities and deep mines that pulled valuable minerals from the planet's core. But now, it looked like something from a nightmare. Black, twisted structures covered the surface like a disease. These weren't buildings, they were alive. Swarm bioconstructs that pulsed and writhed like giant worms. Some were as big as skyscrapers, others spread across the ground like poisonous spider webs. The entire planet looked infected, dying slowly as the swarm creatures ate everything that had once made it beautiful. Kim's ship, the Harmonic Dawn, had once been a peaceful exploration vessel belonging to the collective. It had elegant curves and comfortable living spaces designed for long journeys between the stars. But human engineers had torn out most of the pretty decorations and replaced them with armor plating and weapons. Now it looked like what it was, a warship ready for battle. Standing next to Kim on the bridge was her navigation officer, a tall crystal being named Veltos. His species, the Veltar, were made of living crystal that changed colors based on their emotions. Right now, Veltos was glowing pale white with fear as he looked at the sensor readings. "Captain," he said in his musical voice, "there are millions of swarm creatures down there. They built a massive underground network beneath the surface. Our weapons can't reach them all." Kim smiled grimly as she studied the geological charts. On her screen, her human brain was working differently than her alien crewmates. While they saw problems, she saw opportunities. The planet's crust was cracked and unstable from all the mining that had been done over the years. Deep underground, massive pressure was building up, just waiting for the right trigger. "The planet's core is like a bomb waiting to go off," Kim announced to her mixed crew of humans and aliens. "If we hit the right fault lines, we can cause earthquakes that will force all those swarm creatures to come to the surface." Veltos' crystal body turned even paler. "Commander, that kind of bombardment will destroy the entire planet. Nothing will be able to live there for hundreds of years." Kim looked at him with the cold logic that made humans so effective in war. Look at your screens, Veltos. The planet is already dead. The swarm has poisoned the air, eaten the cities, and turned everything into their breeding ground. We're not destroying a living world. We're making sure the swarm can't use this dead world as their base. The alien crew members looked uncomfortable with this plan. Their species had always tried to preserve and protect. The idea of deliberately destroying an entire planet went against everything they believed in. But the humans on the crew nodded in understanding. Sometimes, to save the patient, you had to cut off the infected limb. Kim gave the order, and the bombardment began. Human weapons specialists had calculated exactly where to hit to cause maximum seismic activity. Massive explosions rocked the planet's surface as the fleet's guns targeted the weakest points in the crust. The ground began to shake and crack as underground pressure was released in controlled bursts. At first, nothing seemed to happen, and the planet began to convulse like a living thing. Huge cracks opened up in the surface, and from these cracks poured millions of swarm creatures. They looked like giant insects crossed with machines, their bodies gleaming with biomechanical armor. Some were the size of cars, others as big as buildings. They all had one thing in common: they were angry at being forced out of their underground hiding places. The fleet was ready for them. As soon as the creatures appeared on the surface, every ship opened fire. The space around Thero 7 lit up with laser beams, missile explosions, and plasma bursts. The swarm creatures tried to fight back, but they had been caught off guard and couldn't organize their defenses. Some of the larger swarm bioships tried to launch from the planet's surface, but Marine Sergeant O was ready for them. He led boarding parties wearing powered armor that made them look like mechanical demons. The armor was twice the size of a normal human and covered in weapons and armor plating. Oh. And his Marines fought their way through swarm ships that were still half alive, cutting through biomechanical corridors that tried to heal themselves around the intruders. The alien medics watching from the fleet were amazed at how much damage the human warriors could take and still keep fighting. Wounds that would instantly kill most species just made the humans angry and more determined. The battle lasted for hours. When it finally ended, Thero 7 was a broken, burning wreck of a planet. The surface was cracked and scarred, and nothing would grow there again for centuries. But the massive swarm nest was completely destroyed, and not a single enemy creature had escaped. The alien crew members looked at the ruined planet with sadness. The humans looked at it with satisfaction. They had learned the first hard lesson of human warfare. Sometimes you have to destroy something completely to make sure your enemies can't use it against you. Engineer Cho crawled through the tight maintenance tunnels of the Harmonic Dawn, sweat dripping from his forehead as he worked on the ship's new cooling systems. Behind him, the alien engineer Modat moved more gracefully through the cramped space, his forearms allowing him to work on multiple components at once. But despite his physical advantages, Modat was completely confused by what the humans had done to his beautiful ship. "I still don't understand this," Modat said, his translator struggling to convey his frustration. "You humans have installed 3 separate cooling systems for the main reactor. 3. Why waste so much space and energy when one efficient system would do the job better?" Cho paused in his work and wiped his hands on a dirty rag. He had been trying to explain human engineering philosophy to the aliens for weeks, but they just didn't get it. Their species had spent thousands of years building perfect, efficient machines that never failed. Humans had spent the same time building machines that could keep working even when they broke. "Look at it this way," Cho said patiently. "Your old cooling system was amazing. It worked perfectly 99% of the time. But what happened during that 1% when it didn't work?" Modat's skin changed to a pale green color, showing his embarrassment. The ship would overheat, and we would have to shut down. "The reactor." "Right, and if you're in the middle of a battle with the swarm, when that happens, you die." Cho pointed to the 3 different cooling units humming around them. "With our system, if one breaks, the other to keep working. If to break, the 3rd one keeps you alive long enough to fix one of the others. If all 3 break..." Cho shrugged. "Well, then you're probably screwed anyway, but at least you had 3 chances instead of 1. This was the fundamental difference. between human and alien thinking. The collective races built things to work perfectly because their worlds were safe and predictable. Humans built things to keep working when everything went wrong, because Earth had taught them that everything would go wrong eventually. The aliens called it paranoia. Humans called it being prepared. In the medical bay, Dr. Han was teaching a group of Narati healers how to treat human battle injuries. The Narati were gentle creatures who looked like walking flowers with soft petals for skin and roots instead of feet. They were natural healers, able to cure diseases and injuries with their touch. But they had never seen anything like human trauma medicine. The human body can survive incredible damage, Han explained as she worked on a wounded Marine who had just been brought in from a swarm boarding action. The Marine's left arm was completely gone, torn off by a biomechanical creature. Blood covered his armor and face, but he was still awake, still talking, still trying to get back to the fight. The Narati healer Silinth watched in amazement as Han sealed the wound and attached a temporary prosthetic arm to the Marine's shoulder. In her species, losing a limb meant certain death. Their bodies were too delicate to survive such trauma. But this human was already moving his new mechanical arm and asking when he could return to duty. "Your people. They don't know when to stop," Silinth whispered, her petal-like skin turning bright orange with confusion. Any other species would be dead from these injuries. But he acts like it's just a minor inconvenience. Han smiled grimly as she finished. "Connecting the prosthetics' neural interfaces. It's exactly what makes us good at this job. We're too stubborn to quit, too stupid to know when we're beaten, and too tough to die easily." The Marine tested his new arm, making a fist with mechanical fingers. "Doc, this thing is actually better than my original arm. Can I get one for the other side, too?" All around the ship, similar scenes were playing out. Human engineers were teaching aliens to build machines that could work when half their parts were broken. Human soldiers were showing alien warriors how to keep fighting when they were badly wounded. Human doctors were teaching alien medics how to save patients who should have been dead. But the aliens were teaching the humans things too. Collective technology was more elegant and efficient than human designs. Alien sensors could detect enemies from much farther away. Alien weapons were more precise and used less energy. The result was something neither species could have. Created alone hybrid technology that combined human durability with alien sophistication. Ships that were both beautiful and nearly indestructible. Weapons that were both elegant and devastatingly effective. The learning curve was steep, but both sides were adapting. The peaceful collective species were becoming harder, more practical, more willing to sacrifice perfection for survival. The warlike humans were becoming more precise, more thoughtful, less likely to solve every problem with brute force. It was a partnership forged in the fires of war, and it was making both sides stronger than they had ever been alone. Intelligence Officer Yoon stood in the main briefing room of the fleet flagship, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the most important discovery of the war. For weeks, human and alien scientists had been cutting apart captured swarm bioships, trying to understand how these creatures worked. What they had found was both fascinating and terrifying. The swarm wasn't just a bunch of individual monsters attacking random targets. They were all connected, like cells in a giant brain that stretched across the galaxy. Every swarm creature, from the smallest scout to the largest battleship, was linked to a central intelligence that controlled their every move. "Look at this," Yoon said, pointing to a complex network of glowing lines on the holographic display. "Every swarm attack we've recorded follows the same pattern. They don't make mistakes, they don't panic, and they don't retreat unless the central intelligence tells them to. It's like fighting a single massive creature that has millions of bodies." The alien commanders in the room looked disturbed by this information. They had hoped the swarm was just a collection of savage beasts that could be defeated through normal military tactics. But this was something much worse. A coordinated enemy with perfect communication and unlimited patience. Admiral Park studied the data with the calm focus that made him so effective in battle. While the aliens were getting scared, he was all ready. Thinking about how to use this information as a weapon, "Show me the source of this network," he ordered. Yoon highlighted a star system deep in swarm territory. Here, this system contains what we believe is the central coordination hub for 17 different sectors. It's like the brain that controls all the swarm movements in this part of the galaxy. The system appeared on the main display, and immediately, everyone could see why the swarm had chosen it as their headquarters. It was a nightmare place that no sane species would ever want to visit. Twin neutron stars spun around each other, creating radiation levels that would cook most living things. In minutes, the space between the stars was filled with deadly particle storms and electromagnetic fields that would fry any normal ship's electronics. If we could destroy this coordination hub, Yoon continued, we would cut off communication to millions of swarm creatures. They would become confused, disorganized, maybe even start fighting each other instead of us. But there was a problem, and everyone in the room knew it. The radiation levels around the target were so high that most species couldn't survive the approach. Even the heavily armored human ships would take massive damage just getting close enough to attack. Admiral Park looked at the tactical display for a long moment, calculating odds and possibilities in his head. Then he turned to face the room, full of officers. It's a one-way trip, he announced calmly. The radiation will kill our electronics, poison our crews, and probably destroy our ships before we can get back out. I need volunteers only. What happened next shocked the alien observers. Without hesitation, without discussion, every single human officer in the room stepped forward. Captains, commanders, lieutenants, even junior officers who had barely finished training, all of them volunteered for what was clearly a suicide mission. The aliens couldn't believe what they were seeing. These humans were calmly volunteering to die, and they were discussing it like it was just another job assignment. No dramatic speeches about honor and glory, no emotional farewells. Just professional soldiers accepting that someone had to do the dangerous work. Commander Lim, who had been with the fleet since the beginning of the war, raised her hand. Sir, I request permission to lead the assault wing. My ship has the best radiation shielding, and my crew has the most experience with swarm tactics. Granted, Park replied without emotion. Pick your crews and start planning the approach. Planning session that followed was both incredible and disturbing for the alien observers. The humans discussed logistics for their own deaths the same way they might plan a supply run. They talked about radiation exposure rates, backup communication systems, and emergency protocols as if they were discussing the weather. The collective representatives watching from the side of the room realized they were seeing something they couldn't fully understand. These humans didn't see death as a terrible tragedy to be avoided at all costs. They saw it as just another obstacle to overcome, another price that might need to be paid to complete the mission, to the peaceful aliens. This attitude was almost incomprehensible. But they were beginning to understand that this was exactly why humans were so effective in war. They weren't fighting just to survive, they were fighting to win, no matter what the cost. And that willingness to sacrifice everything for victory was what made them the galaxy's most dangerous species. The human assault fleet emerged from hyperspace, into what could only be described as hell itself. Twin neutron stars spun around each other in a deadly dance, throwing off radiation that would have instantly killed any normal living creature. The space between them glowed with deadly energy that made the vacuum itself seem to burn with invisible fire. Captain Zhang stood on the bridge of her destroyer, indomitable, watching her ship's hull begin to glow like heated metal as they pushed deeper into the radiation storm. Warning alarms were screaming throughout the ship, but she had ordered them turned off. There was no point in being reminded that they were all about to die. Everyone already knew that. Distance to target. She asked her navigation officer. 12 million kilometers in closing, replied Officer Beak, squinting at his instruments as sparks flew from overloaded circuits. But Captain, my navigation computer just died. I'm going to have to steer this thing by looking out the window. Behind the Indomitable, 4 more human destroyers followed in formation. Their hulls were already starting to buckle from the radiation. Pressure and their crews were working in full environmental suits because the life support systems were failing one by one. But they kept moving forward, deeper into the nightmare system where no sane species would dare to go. The collective fleet hung back at what they considered maximum. Safe distance still close enough to watch, but far enough away that their delicate ships wouldn't be fried by the radiation. The alien crews watched their human allies push into certain death with a mixture of horror and amazement. "How are they still alive?" whispered one Veltar officer, his crystal body flashing with confused colors. That radiation should have killed them 10 minutes ago. But humans had grown up under a star that was constantly trying to kill them. Earth's sun bombarded its children with radiation every day, and over millions of years, human bodies had learned to handle punishment that would destroy other species. What was instantly lethal to aliens was just extremely dangerous to humans. At the center of the system, the swarm's hive nexus waited like a massive cancer growing in space. It was enormous, bigger than most space stations, made of biomechanical material that pulsed with its own evil life. Around it, dozens of swarm bioships floated like guard dogs, their hulls actually feeding on the deadly radiation that protected their home. "Weapons range in 30 seconds, called out Weapons Officer Song from her station, her targeting computer. Screen was dead, showing only static. But she didn't seem worried. "I'm switching to visual targeting. If you can see it, I can kill it." This was the moment when the battle became something from humanity's ancient past. All their advanced technology was failing around them. Computer screens were going dark, automated systems were shutting down, and even basic communications were cutting in and out. But instead of retreating, human crews adapted. Navigation Officer Beak steered the ship by looking through a reinforced window. Using his own eyes to judge distance and speed like sailors from Earth's old ocean-going days, Weapons Officer Song aimed the ship's guns manually, turning wheels and adjusting angles by hand like artillery crews from ancient wars. "Target the big one in the center," Captain Jang ordered, pointing through the bridge window at the hive nexus. "Pour everything we have into it." The Indomitable's main guns opened fire, sending streams of plasma and missiles toward the swarm command center. The other human ships followed suit, their weapons lighting up the deadly space around the neutron. Stars with explosive flashes. The swarm bioships responded immediately, turning to face this unexpected threat. They had been designed to fight in this radioactive hellscape, their living hulls actually growing stronger as they absorbed the deadly energy around them. But they had never faced an enemy crazy enough to follow them into their own protective radiation field. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships fought with manual controls and backup systems while their crews slowly cooked from radiation exposure. Swarm creatures attacked with weapons that grew from their own bodies, trying to overwhelm the human fleet with sheer numbers, but the humans refused to die easily. When their main guns failed, they switched to secondary weapons. When those failed, they used emergency systems. When everything else broke down, some crews actually fired handheld weapons through gaps in their ship's armor, turning space fighters into something like old-fashioned battleships. Where sailors fired cannons by hand, the collective fleet watched. From their safe distance, unable to believe what they were seeing, the humans were fighting a battle that should have been impossible, using nothing but determination, backup systems, and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that had made their species the most feared warriors in the galaxy. It was terrifying and magnificent at the same time. The swarm's hive nexus was dying, but it was taking the human fleet with it. Commander Lim stood on the bridge of her flagship Defiant, watching her ship fall apart around her as they poured everything they had into the massive, biomechanical structure at the center of the system. The nexus was like a living nightmare made of metal and flesh. It writhed and twisted as human weapons tore chunks from its surface, exposing pulsing organs and sparking circuits beneath its armored skin. Dark fluid that might have been blood or oil leaked from its wounds, creating clouds of toxic vapor. In the radioactive space around the neutron stars, but the Nexus was fighting back. Tentacles the size of skyscrapers lashed out from its surface, wrapping around human ships and crushing them like tin cans. Biomechanical weapons grew from its hull like cancerous tumors, firing streams of acid and living projectiles that ate through armor plating. "Damage report," Lim shouted over the sound of alarms and explosions echoing through his ship. Tactical Officer Shin looked up from his sparking console, his face grim. Engine cores breached and leaking radiation into the Mel screw. Lower decks. Life support is failing on 7 levels. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the whole ship breaks apart. Around them, the other ships of the assault wing were in similar condition. The destroyer Relentless had lost its entire forward section, but was still firing with its rear guns. The cruiser Steadfast was drifting without power, its crew working desperately to get the weapons back online. The corvette Swift had been cut in half by a swarm bioweapon, but both pieces were somehow still shooting at the enemy. Lim looked around at her bridge. Crew young men and women who had volunteered for this suicide mission, knowing they would never see home again. They were scared. She could see it in their eyes, but they were still at their posts, still doing their jobs even as their ship died around them. "Captain," said Navigator Jen, his voice surprisingly calm for someone whose console was on fire. "We've lost engine control, but we still have momentum carrying us toward the target." Lim understood immediately. Yeah, the Defiant was already heading straight for the Hive Nexus, moving too fast to stop even if they wanted to. Their ship was going to crash into the Swarm Command Center whether they liked it or not. The only question was whether they could make that crash count for something. "All hands, this is the captain," Lim announced over the ship's dying communication system. "We're going to ram the target. Everyone get to emergency stations and brace for impact. It's been an honor serving with you all." The crew responded with quiet professionalism that would have amazed the alien observers watching from a safe distance. No panic, no crying, no desperate attempts to escape. They just secured their stations, helped wounded comrades, and prepared to die like soldiers. The Defiant struck the Hive Nexus's central core like a spear thrown by an angry god. The ship's nuclear reactor, already damaged and unstable, breached completely on impact. For one brilliant moment, the explosion outshone even the twin neutron stars, creating a miniature sun in the heart of the Swarm Command Center. But the Defiant wasn't alone. Soon as the other human ships realized what Lim was doing, they followed her example. The Steadfast, with its crew of barely 20 survivors, aimed itself at another vital section of the Nexus. The two halves of the Swift somehow coordinated their final attack, striking different targets simultaneously. One by one, the human ships turned themselves into guided missiles, their crews staying at their posts to the very end to make sure their sacrifice hit the right targets. They could have abandoned ship, could have tried to escape in life pods, but they knew that if they left, their ships might miss the target, and then their deaths would be meaningless. The Hive Nexus convulsed. As explosion after explosion tore through its biomechanical structure, massive chunks of its surface broke away and drifted into the radioactive void. The tentacles that had been attacking the human fleet went limp and lifeless. The bioweapons stopped firing as the central intelligence that controlled them died. In nuclear fire, across 17 sectors of space, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Swarm fleets that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly stopped dead in space. The creatures that had always acted like parts of a single giant organism began behaving like confused animals. Some attacked each other, some fled in random directions, and some just drifted aimlessly, as if they had forgotten what they were supposed to be doing. The collective ships watching from their safe distance saw their sensors light up with reports. From across the galaxy, swarm attacks were stopping. Entire enemy fleets were breaking apart and scattering. The coordination network that had made the swarm nearly unstoppable was gone, shattered by human ships that had been willing to die to break it. But the victory came at a terrible price. Of the 5 ships that had entered the radiation zone, none had survived. Hundreds of human sailors had died in those few minutes of battle. Young men and women who had volunteered to sacrifice everything for people they had never met. The alien crews watched the aftermath in stunned silence, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. These humans had died for strangers without hesitation, without regret, without even asking for thanks. It was behavior so alien to most species that it was almost incomprehensible. Yet it was exactly this willingness to sacrifice that had broken an enemy no one else could defeat. The memorial service aboard the collective flagship was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. In the main assembly hall, thousands of beings from different species had gathered to honor the dead from both sides of the war, but as the ceremony progressed, the aliens noticed something strange about how the humans mourned their fallen comrades. While the collective species spoke of lost potential and lives cut tragically short, the humans talked differently. They didn't focus on what their dead friends would never get to do. Instead, they spoke about missions completed, objectives achieved, and duties fulfilled to the end. It was as if they measured a life's worth not by its length, but by what it accomplished. Commander, Lim knew exactly what she was doing when she rammed the swarm nexus, said one young human sailor. She completed the mission and saved millions of lives. That's not a tragedy, that's a victory. The alien observers found this attitude both disturbing and fascinating. To them, death was always a failure, something to be avoided at all costs. But to humans, death was just another tool that could be used to achieve important goals. Admiral Park stood at the front of the Great Hall, his dress uniform decorated with new medals that meant nothing compared to the respect he saw in the alien eyes watching him. The old human warrior looked tired after months of constant battle, but there was satisfaction in his weathered face. The swarm coordination network is broken, he announced to the assembled crowd. Their fleets are scattered and confused. Your worlds can start healing. Your children can grow up singing instead of hiding in bunkers. The hall fell silent as High Counselor Thelera stepped forward. Her bioluminescent skin was glowing with colors that most humans had never seen before. Ancient patterns reserved for the most sacred ceremonies in collective culture. For too long, we have kept humanity at arm's length, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the translator systems. We feared your violent nature, your willingness to fight and die. But we have learned that this strength can be turned toward protection instead of destruction. She paused, looking directly at Admiral Park. We offer humanity full membership in the Cathara Collective, not as hired soldiers or temporary allies, but as equals, as family. The integration that followed over the next few months changed both civilizations in ways nobody had expected. Human colonies began appearing throughout collective space, and the differences between the species became clear immediately. Human settlements looked like military bases compared to the elegant alien cities. Every building had thick walls, multiple escape routes, and backup power systems. Human children learned emergency procedures alongside their alphabet. Human farmers grew food in underground bunkers in case their surface crops failed. At first, the aliens thought this was unnecessary paranoia. But then natural disasters struck several worlds, and only the human colonies were prepared. When pirates attacked trade routes, human settlements fought them off, while alien cities called for help. Slowly, other species began adopting human survival techniques. Meanwhile, alien observers set up research stations around Earth to study what they called crucible culture, the way humans grew stronger through hardship instead of weaker. They watched human children play games that would terrify alien youngsters, learning to overcome fear and pain as naturally as breathing. Captain Min stood on the bridge of the rebuilt Harmonic Dawn, watching her mixed crew work together with smooth efficiency. The ship itself had been transformed, still beautiful like collective vessels, but now tough and reliable like human warships. It was the perfect symbol of what both species could achieve together. Her navigation officer was a young Veltar named Kailash, whose crystal body sparkled with excitement as he practiced emergency procedures that his people had never needed before. A year ago, his species had cared only about art and beauty. Now they were learning that survival skills could be their own kind of art. They're changing, observed the collective scientist Tillian, who had been studying the cultural integration. My people are becoming harder, more practical, less concerned with beauty, and more focused on function. Min smiled as she watched her human crew members work with alien precision and patience they had never possessed before. The humans were learning to think before acting, to plan carefully instead of charging ahead. The aliens were learning to act quickly when planning wasn't enough. So are we, she replied. And maybe that's exactly what both our species needed. Across the galaxy, the changes were spreading. Human military academies began teaching alien tactical theories. Alien universities started offering courses in human survival techniques. Children from both civilizations grew up together, creating a new generation that combined human toughness with alien wisdom. The swarm threat was over. But its defeat had created something even more valuable than victory. It had proven that different species could stand together against impossible odds. Galaxy had learned that sometimes salvation doesn't come from the wise or the pure, but from those who have been forged in fire and choose to use their strength. To protect others, new legends were already being born in the space between stars. Stories of the day, the feared Deathworlders became heroes instead of conquerors. It was a choice that saved more than just the Cathera Collective. It saved the very idea that unity could triumph over darkness, and that the strongest bonds are forged in the heat of battle.